See beverages.
Yeah. When we started our book club a little over a year ago, one of the fun things that we do is trying to pair tobacco choices, either cigars or pipes or both, and then Daniel will make up some cocktails or bring some beers or something that kind of match what we've been reading. And so what did you made the yeah, so we got Harvey Wallbangers to drink during the episode.
And it was on the Edinburgh Reddit. I actually saw this clip somewhere else, but it was a guy who was Russian. Mm-hmm. He said he was a Russian pagan, and that
used to be Russian, isn't anymore.
He no longer? Yeah. He is Russian, but he used to live in Russia, and he's moved to Scotland.
Gotcha.
And so he said that he's a pagan and that he didn't know, but when he moved, his gnome. Which he had a Cyrillic name for, which I wasn't, or like name in the other letters that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, Cyrillic.
But he said, he said he didn't know that gnomes could fly on planes.
Yeah.
And it traveled with him. To Scotland, is from what he can tell, because he's there now and his Wi-Fi doesn't work, and he's tried everything, but he can't get his Wi-Fi to work.
Right.
Because the gnome is messing
goddamn
with his
gnomes.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Because the issue was he didn't know the gnome went with him, so he didn't do a welcoming ritual for the gnome. So the gnome is now jacking with him. But he said then the issue was he was the reason for the post was that he had talked to his mom, and his mom said, you need to, the gnome likes vodka, and he likes this brand of vodka. So you need to offer the gnome this specific brand of vodka.
He's a Russian gnome,
so he wants a nice quality Russian vodka. But he's like, I can't find it anywhere here.
Because I'm in
Scotland.
And
he's like, can anyone help me get this vodka?
So that's what the point of the Reddit thread was
that was the
how
point.
do I find this vodka
to help me the gnome?
Was it the kind that comes in the AK-47 shaped bottle?
No, it was like a very fancy, long, slender bottle that also the name was in Cyrillic, so I don't know
what
it
problems
is.
like this?
As far as I'm aware, he has still had it. But then one guy said, "Hey, I've got a number here. It's for the Royal Ed. They should be able to help you." And the guy was like, "Well, I don't think I need a hospital. I'm okay, and that, I don't think this is going to help me." And he was like, "The gnome isn't sick, so this is fine. This isn't going to help me at all."
Right.
He's like, "My man, this is a mental hospital, and they know all about gnomes."
Yeah.
And then he responded, "My gnome is not mentally ill."
Michael Van, and welcome everybody to another episode of Under Towers Podcast. My name is Steven.
I'm Daniel.
And we have an awesome episode for you.
Yes.
We're gonna skip the news. We're gonna skip the ad because we just got done with an absolutely amazing conversation that is coming up for you guys with JB Jackson, author of Shagduk. And I cannot wait for you to hear this interview. We had such a great time with JB. Daniel, give us a little intro into JB for those who have not read this book yet.
Yes. So we are so pleased to welcome JB to the show today. JB is an author now residing in Northern California. Originally a Fort Worth native, he released his first novel, Shagduk, in 2022, out on Pylon Press. Its sequel, Ursula of Ulm, is expected to be released here shortly. Both works being part of the Dordica Saga, which, and when I wrote these notes, I said it was a part of a trilogy. We will find out in this interview it is part of a 5-book series that's being written. But JB has also contributed stories to Black Rose, The Wells of Ur, and Deathflex. And yeah, we are just we'll get right to it.
Yeah, we had such a great time.
Yeah,
JB's a great
awesome
dude, and we're gonna just cut the bullshit and enjoy the interview.
JB, it's great to have you here.
These are Harvey
Thanks,
Wallbangers
Daniel.
in honor of JB.
Yep. Cheers to
Cheers.
Shagduk and JB.
Shagduk.
Nothing
That's
like a Harvey
fantastic.
Wallbanger 12 or
I was gonna
11.
say, yeah. Woo! Mixed drinks before lunch.
Oh, that actually
Phenomenal. That's great. I like
Not
that.
bad, yeah. It might
Harvey
be a
Wallbangers are a little bit before my time, but I found a half-empty bottle of Galliano at my in-laws,
Yeah.
nice.
and everyone laughed. Well, what's this? And I Googled it and did some research. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember Harvey Wallbangers.
That's
It's
fantastic.
not something you hear about a lot anymore.
No.
Uh,
When I read the book, they just come up several times. With Stephen has them with V a few times, and a few times I think out at a bar. I had never heard of it before. I had to Google what it even was. It was like, oh, it's a screwdriver variation, and I didn't even know what Galliano was. Stephen finds a bottle of there too, so
Right.
it was fun. But then it was like, oh, this was actually a super popular cocktail in the '70s, so it totally tracks.
Well, and this is just perhaps an interesting question while we're talking about the drink here. But kind of what order did it happen for you? Did you name the imp Harvey first, or did the drink come first? Was there an order of operations that those happened, or was it kind of just synchronicity?
Well, I'm a big fan of that kind of synchronicity, and I do look for it, and it always pleases me when I come across it. I think I had the imp named Harvey first,
Mm-hmm.
and then when I discovered the Harvey Wallbanger, it made sense to pursue that as the beverage of choice in the book.
Yeah. No, because it seemed to fit to me as I was reading it that as he named Harvey, the imp Harvey, he started having these drinks more frequently and in more places. Like it was just kind of Harvey was following him everywhere, literally. I liked that.
And the drink, something about it, maybe it was the shape of the bottle and the silliness of the name, but it just kind of captured my imagination. And that can happen with anything. It can be a drink or an object, a book, a song, and I just make a mental note of it and try and put it somewhere.
Sure, I
yeah.
love that. You go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say we're kind of naturally heading in this direction, anyways. I'm an aspiring novelist. I'm working on my first ones now, but I've written screenplays that have gone nowhere, but written several feature-length screenplays over the last decade. And so, since we're heading in this direction, anyways, I wanted to talk a little bit to you about the process for you, and kind of what your process as a writer looks like when you're starting a new work. How that kind of, because I find it very interesting listening to authors discuss it, because there's little differences for everybody.
Well, by the time I figured out I wanted to write fiction, I had compiled a thick notebook of notes that I'd taken over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to a point where I was able to organize them by, for example, names that captured my attention or my imagination, plots, settings, then little details, anecdotes, anything I felt was material I could use in my fiction, I made a note of. So when it was time to write something, I referred to my notes for ideas. And so probably what happened is the setting came to me. I wanted to write something that had academic setting. I wanted books to be involved. I wanted music to be involved. Because I'm interested in the time period, I decided to set it in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to write about a place I knew about, so I chose my hometown of Fort Worth. But also because not a lot of stuff takes place in Fort Worth. There was a Jimmy Stewart film, Strategic Air Command, from the 50s that was filmed there. Some notable scenes in Logan's Run were filmed there. And I just thought it'd be nice to add to the body of literature that's out there that takes place in Fort Worth. and it's kind of also a love letter to my hometown, which I miss. I would never go back to live there.
Right.
I'm happy here. Northern California is my home now. But all these different ideas came together, and when I had all of those things in place, it became easier to imagine what the story might be.
Mm-hmm.
I tried a short story back in the 90s that took place in a library where a box of donations came in, and the librarian's digging through it and finds, the forbidden tome.
Oh, yeah.
And
Nice.
it wasn't a very good story, and I didn't really know how to write a story.
Mm-hmm.
So I was concerned about that when I approached Shagduk. I had a lot of false starts. And then it occurred to me that it could be written in the form of a diary. Now, I had already experimented with the diary format in the 90s when I did a couple of zines. The zines were a character that was really an exaggerated, absurd version of me, writing about my daily life, but in such a way that it was comical.
Nice.
And as my model, I was kind of inspired at the time by George and Weedon Grossmith's Diary of a Nobody, which I have
awesome.
right here.
Awesome.
It's a nice Everyman's Library edition. This book is about a guy, a Victorian gentleman who has a household, a maid, a family, children, and just ridiculous stuff happens to him all day long, and he writes about it in his diary. So it's a comic novel. So I tried it out, and I understood immediately that writing in a diary format made it easy to tell a story because it was in digestible chunks,
Sure.
and it enabled me to keep track of what was going on. I think of it as training wheels, really. But there are serious novels that are written in a epistolary format, like Dracula is probably one of the most famous ones.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I just stuck with that, and it started to flow a lot better.
I love that.
How do you go about with that format specifically with any of the kind of prep work? I know you said you have your notebook full of ideas. Were you just kind of drawing off of that, or did you do any sort of outlining before going into it, or was it a little more free flowing? And
well, at first I thought, okay, where do I want to go with this? At the beginning, I wanted there to be the discovery of occult material, for example. But I needed a context, and all sorts of people, places, and things from my real life informed the choices that were available to me. So the character of Professor Sherwood was loosely based on a similar person that I worked with. And it just, came to me, and I tried it out. But I had to be headed somewhere, so I did have a very loose outline in that I know where the story ends. I know that there is potential to take it further. I know that certain things need to happen along the way. And so I just chose one of those important milestones as something to aim for, and write towards, and steer the story toward.
Cool.
And each time I introduced a parameter to my methodology, it made it easier to proceed.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'd write myself into a corner and decide, well, I'd really like this other thing to happen, but I spoiled it by what I've already written.
Yeah.
So I had to throw away some stuff and rewrite some stuff. And the longer the work gets, the harder that gets to do, to go back and say, well, if, let's say, I want to get rid of the Harvey Wallbanger.
Yeah.
You know, I need to have another drink because, reasons.
Yeah.
So I have to go search for all the instances I mentioned Harvey Wallbangers and change it. And I miss one. There's moments where I don't call it that. I call it something else, like his drink.
Yeah.
So I've gotten myself into a little trouble, but I was learning as I went along, and I'm getting better at reducing the amount of work I have to do.
Sure.
Right.
I know what pitfalls to avoid.
That's awesome.
You already mentioned one influence on the start of the story. Tell me if I'm way off base here, but as I was reading it, I of course was catching, Lovecraft vibes and even Arthur Machen, but for some reason, and maybe it's just the time period and the wintry setting at the beginning. But there were some vibes I was also getting from Peter Straub's Ghost Story, and I was curious if that was an influence on you. It's one of my favorite pieces of horror fiction, and again, it's not a direct thing. It was just kind of a vibe that I was getting, especially at the beginning of Shagduk.
Not specifically, but the vibe definitely has its origins in when I was a little kid and I'd go stay at my grandmother's for the weekend. She collected horror paperbacks. Peter Straub was there, Stephen King, but also lots of books with titles like Attack of the Ants or something.
Nice. Nice.
But I tended to gravitate toward the ones that had more of an evil vibe about them. I remember Amityville Horror.
Yeah.
So that, upset my mental stability at a young age. So I definitely get that vibe and respond to it and try and create it. Not specifically motivated by Straub because it's been so long since I read that book. But weird tales in general indirectly influence me. I'm aware that I'm writing in a sort of a tradition here. But at the same time, I'm doing something that, not that it hasn't been done before, it has actually been done before. This book, Satan Wants Me by Robert Irwin. He recently passed away. But this book is written in a diary format. It's in an academic setting. It's about somebody who's studying the occult. Not a lot happens in it. It's set in the 60s, and so it's got that vibe to it. But it really, found it pretty entertaining. So, I can't say that it influenced me because I had already begun on my own journey before I discovered this book.
Oh, cool.
So it's just one of those coincidences, really. It's worth mentioning because anyone who likes this book would probably like Shagduk and vice versa.
Okay,
so
awesome.
I recommend this to you.
Phenomenal.
Well, thank you.
That's a hell of a cover too. We're big fans of book covers, and that one looks awesome.
Yeah, I can't read an ugly book. I can't read a modern reprint where they've upset the vibe with typography and imagery that doesn't seem to go. So the farther back you go, the more likely it'll feel right to me. And so I tend to read older hardbacks if I can. One example of when that was not the case is New York Review Books is reissuing a lot of cool books. And I came across Rogue Mail by Jeffrey Household.
Oh, cool.
Which is kind of a touchstone for me in what I'm planning to write for book 3. I will probably read this again and study it.
Oh, very cool.
But it's a new paperback. I don't like paperbacks. I mean, new paperbacks. That is, I don't love the art. It doesn't. The book is written in the 30s, and I would rather read this story a book that looks like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But sometimes you don't have any choice.
Yeah.
So it's fine.
Yeah.
We'll have to. Both of those sound awesome. We'll have to check those out.
Definitely. Yeah.
Daniel, you had a really cool insight that you shared with us here when we were prepping for the episode
Yeah.
about JB's kind of accidental influence on our podcast and on our book club too.
Yeah, I tweeted about it last night, and but wanted to note it here that I had kind of fallen out of the practice of reading very much, kind of coming out of high school and college or whatever, and read a Twitter thread. A guy who goes under the pseudonym Conan Esquire had talked about how much he loved Shagduk, and kind of mentioned that like sometimes we expect indie publishers or indie presentations, you just kind of you expect to be like, oh, it's nice for what it is. But he talked about how he read this and it was like, this is just good no matter what format it released in, and spoke to what he loved about it. And it sounded really fascinating and compelling to me. And I got it at the end of 2022. I read it before the end of the year. And I realized I told Sam about it at the time. And that reading that book is what kind of kickstarted me reading again. And then it was a few months later, through that similar kind of ecosystem on Twitter, I was recommended Gene Wolfe and Book of the New Sun, which is the book we first read all together for our book club. And so like Shagduk sort of inadvertently, and also watching the anime film Akira is the first time we all got together. But those three instances are basically why we're talking here today. And sort of unrelated to that, we had this, we connected. And so there's sort of a weird synchronicity there. And it's very, I had not like put all those pieces together in my head until like yesterday. I was like, wait a second, and trying to timeline it out. And I was like, this is kind of funny, and very special. It was really enjoyable.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes, exactly.
Because we're having a hell of a time.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Well,
100%.
and so I read Shagduk back in 2022 and loved it. We've all read it, just read it just now. Going back to it was wonderful and just increased my admiration for it. But while we're talking a little more on the writerly side, one of the things I found, especially the second time through, was that while the book is broken up into journal entries, so you've got each day, most of them are pretty short, and some of them are a little longer especially when Stephen's writing about a more detailed scene happening. But what I found that I often read the book, the story goes from January 1st to May 8th, and it's about 18 weeks, almost exactly. And I found that the weeks were almost like chapters. And I wanted to ask, was that just sort of a natural? Did that just happen naturally, or was there sort of an intention? Because I've also found my life feels like the weeks are almost little chapters where there's like little themes in a week that happen. And then obviously things stretch out beyond that. And then months are sort of like book one, book two kind of things. But I found the book flowed where, you got the entry of Stephen in January where Sherwood's missing and that happens. And then February seems to be kind of, I think that's the beginning of the band, and also like that's where everything is happening with V, and then and then the real occult things start happening more into March and then into the rest of the story. But was that intentional, or just sort of because you were writing in a way that was true to life that just kind of happened, or how would you talk about it?
I think that it was not intentional, and I think if any novel that you would write, no matter what your organization, it would probably naturally fall into meaningful chunks. I do think of each entry as something that has a beginning and an end. And then there are periods of Stephen's life that have a beginning and an end. And I'm aware of those, either consciously or not, but I don't know if I have anything more to say about that other than because it's organized by dates.
Right.
I couldn't also have chapters.
Right.
So probably I had some sort of organizational process in the back of my mind,
Sure.
But I think that is interesting, an art reflecting life kind of thing, where, like you said, life does kind of end up falling into chapters like that, and it speaks to the quality of the writing, JB, that it does. The book ends up falling in that way as well, just naturally.
Similarly, one thing I thought was really interesting, and you mentioned not having a super strict outline, was that there's a lot that Stephen puts on the page, but there's also, like, as you read the book, you realize there's a lot of things happening that he's not talking about, both either from his past, like he went to Nam, and you get a few mentions to his parents, but not much, and it becomes kind of apparent through those mentions that, and through their absence, that he probably didn't have a pretty good home life growing up. How much of the details either in the story or before that you didn't put, like, it feels very intentional what's not there as much as it is there. That's another one where I was like, did you have like a calendar of like, this actually happened, but he didn't write about it, or how did you think about that is, I guess, really what I want to know.
Yeah.
Well, it's the book is someone's diary, and I wanted it to feel real.
Right.
And so I'm always conscious of what would Stephen write about.
Yeah.
Back when I was his age, if I were living under similar circumstances, I would write about the things that are happening around me immediately.
Right.
Occult activity would be front and foremost, because that's not something that is normal.
Sure.
I tried to shy away from mentioning family because I didn't want to write about family.
Yeah.
That would add too much of a distraction. However, if I were going to introduce family, which I do at some point, it has to be part of the story.
Right.
Or it provides an opportunity to be part of the story. Now, there's a lot of stuff in there that just really isn't part of the story. It's like window dressing.
Sure.
And there's probably more of that than needs to be, and more than you would find in a typical novel, because it's a diary, but also because that interests me. Whenever I discover an author, I have traditionally read their biography first, and then I tend to read their notebooks and letters and diaries if they exist. Then when I get around to reading their fiction, I've got like a background that helps me understand what I'm looking at.
Try to read the person first, almost.
Yeah, so I use Tolkien as an example, a famous example, because people asked him about his personal life when he became famous, and he didn't understand how that was relevant. Who I am and my own personal life has nothing to do with Lord of the Rings, and we, clearly that's not true. We understand today.
Yeah.
So,
you were already kind of steeping yourself in this style of writing by reading letters and diary entries from.
Yeah, I suppose so.
So is your notebook? Is it a red notebook too?
That's something I added later. I just stole that from Robert Irwin's book. The character in his book is studying the occult and was taught, don't put magic stuff in your everyday notebook. You want to have a special notebook for that. It's a red one. So that's a little homage to Robert Irwin.
Nice.
Interesting.
Nice. You got to have the nods in there. Yeah.
What I'm not aware of is maybe in the occult world, red notebooks are a thing. I don't know.
I think they might be. I know that Carl Jung, who is a psychiatrist and philosopher, he wrote a very strange book that's like his dream journeys, which was also is known as the Red Book. And so I wondered if it was a riff off that idea too, but And
I was
know,
aware of it.
Yeah.
And I was pleased that there was that kind of synchronicity there.
It is interesting too that Tolkien's book, the book that we're told is actually the translation in of the Lord of the Rings stories, is also the Red Book. There's a lot of red books.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I love that it made sense to me that it was a red book. It's like once it was like the red book is like that feels right.
Yeah, that's a special one that has words of power in it. Oh my god.
Yeah. So sometimes when I make a choice, like to make the notebook red, if there are echoes of that elsewhere, I use that. To increase the power of my writing.
Yeah. Well, we've brought up Tolkien, and there's several magical or ancient languages in here. I'm curious, did you do the language that we get feels good and lived in and real? Did you do a bunch of background on the language of Astarion and Dordic, or is what we've got kind of what you worked on? And I'm not looking for an answer either way there. I'm just curious.
Well, I have a background in linguistics, a bachelor's degree, and I'm interested in languages. And I appreciated that in Tolkien that the languages felt real, as opposed to the almost comical gibberish that you would get from like a 50s movie,
right?
Where clearly they just made up some gobbledygook to make it sound like. It doesn't take someone, you don't have to know about language to recognize that that's not a real language that's coming out of this character's mouth. So I wanted it to feel like a real language. So I did a little bit of work on it, and I've got notes somewhere, but I intentionally try and not to give you a lot of Dordic because that just creates more work for me. And so I've got just enough in there that that Stephen knows that language.
Yeah, that makes sense.
He does spend a lot of time studying, like lots of nights in studying.
I did love that he made a poster with Dordic on it, and that it annoyed Randy.
That was funny.
That was one of my favorite. There's a lot of my favorite little moments, if I'm being straight up.
And
that made me chuckle.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into the characters, and while we're still on writing too, like, when Daniel showed me the book, I was like, oh, a cult, this is going to be creepy. And so I started reading the book with like nothing other than Daniel's recommendation on it. And I could not believe how funny it is. It is so funny. Like all of Steven's ideas and his interactions, especially with girls, are just the best ever. Like it almost reads like a comedy to me. Like I was laughing out loud at this book so many times, and there was lots of heavy, like serious moments too. But it was quite funny. I was very impressed by that.
Well, I have something to say about that. When I first wanted to write a book, I wanted it to be serious and dark and scary, but my sense of humor kept coming out in the writing, to my dismay. It bothered me at first.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
But sorry, then, I laughed so much.
There was a quote I read by the composer Gustav Mahler, and I don't even remember it now, so I might be getting this all wrong. I think he made either a critic said something about one of his symphonies that said it has everything but the kitchen sink. He didn't say kitchen sink, but when you listen to a Mahler symphony, it has everything in it. It's got tragedy and sadness and laughter and joy. And he acknowledged somewhere that he puts all of life into his work. Right. And it kind of made me think really hard about what art is. And I went on this long journey about it. But at some point, given what his attitude was toward allowing humor into his work, I started to allow it into mine. And that it became ultimately a comic novel is something that I stopped caring about. Right. It is what it is. I hate that phrase, but that's what it is, and that's fine with me now, because it's not just a comic novel. I mean, above all, it is a funny book, but the story gets told, and there's dark moments, of course.
Yeah.
But ultimately it makes it feel more realistic because Stephen's whole life is on the page.
No, it is.
Yeah,
That's
and
what I was
he's
going to say.
obviously 23, like obviously 23. It's
Yeah.
And
well,
it allows for these contrasts that you wouldn't have otherwise.
the comedy to me felt it. I appreciated it very much because it didn't ever feel like it was in like trying to be funny. It was the comedy was happening because it was honest.
Yeah.
And it was honest to the characters and to just the way that life is and the situations that one can find themselves in, especially as a young man. And that was to me where I was catching the comedy and why it resonated and worked so well in the context of this kind of occult novel was like it's funny because it's presenting the story in a real way.
Well, and there's a lot of moments where, like, especially at the library, where Stephen is being funny on purpose that are funny. But there's a lot of moments where Stephen's writing his journal and it's hilarious, and Stephen's not trying to be funny. It's just really funny.
like where Randy's like, "You don't party, do you?" Like, this little quip.
Also, one of the funniest scenes I thought in the book is actually one of the darkest scenes when Stephen goes to the play to see Harvey performed with Boggs.
Yeah.
And the Harvey being on the stage
That was brilliant.
was just like, it was like, I just was like cackling for minutes reading it. And then Boggs is like, looks to Stephen is like, man, are you, and Stephen's laughing too. But then he's like, dude, are you okay? And then Stephen like breaks down and basically says no, which you get an emotional honesty from Stephen that you actually don't get in a lot of the book because it's kind of, there's a distance, even though it's his journal. And it's like the reality of like, oh wow, this is this happy-go-lucky guy who's like having a, he's doing his thing. He's obviously dabbling with these mysterious things. He's also trying to be in a band. He's also trying to get laid, and it's not working out very well. And then it's like, actually, his life is kind of falling apart, and he's trying to hold it together, but it's like, wait a minute, this is really, really bad. And that scene also tells you, I feel like, because Stephen acts pretty coolly to especially when the little imp Shagduk, he's very calm about it overall. But you see in that scene that's just kind of him putting a bold face in his diary, that actually somewhere deep down, he's kind of like, oh my God, what is happening to me?
Yeah.
And he's just not really told you. He's not really told you how deep it's like, I'm really torn up about this.
Right. When I was reading it, it felt like The Rambler was kind of like a snapshot of what his life was like. Like, car is him. Like, he's got a handprint on it. He can't seem to get the damn thing off. He also can't go in reverse. He can only go forwards. Like,
that's interesting.
I thought that was such like this is a snapshot of what it's like.
Really
to
is
be
it?
him.
I have not thought about the can't go in reverse metaphor.
Well, he just talks about the Rambler a lot.
He does. He
Sounds
really does.
It sounds like a real piece of shit.
I love that you're making these discoveries and these connections, some of which are intentional, some I didn't think of.
Do you play trombone?
No.
That's
a word about Harvey.
Yeah.
So because this is a diary that takes place in 1977, I read a year's worth of newspapers.
Oh, wow.
To find out what was going on in the world, and to get a feeling for the zeitgeist.
Like in 77, most newspapers?
Yeah, and where people's heads were at the time, because I wanted to be true to that. And I was looking through the paper, like the entertainment section, and a production of Harvey caught my eye in Granbury. And I had already established the name Harvey in the book. And so I'm like, that's it. That's where he's going to go.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
So that
look for
production
those kinds of
actually happened.
opportunities. Yeah.
That's amazing.
That was
That's
a real
incredible.
performance.
That's
on
incredible.
that date, in that place, in that theater.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
What a fun
How cool.
coincidence. Yeah.
Oh my
So I did my homework, and so whenever there's something like that in the book that seems to be tied to a real life event, it probably was, and I worked hard to get the details right.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So if you
It
look up
feels
the
that way,
weather
really.
for July
Yeah.
12th, that was what the weather was.
Yeah,
Oh
I
my
couldn't
God.
believe
Awesome,
I couldn't
man.
believe how cold it was in Texas. I was
It
like,
is- it is-
wow.
Oh yeah, it gets real cold there.
That's so
especially
crazy.
especially like in that Fort Worth, Dallas area. I also did think it's interesting that Dallas doesn't come up because they're not very far apart. But I guess if for a Fort Worthian,
You
it
just
doesn't.
sort of stay there, right?
You don't worry about Dallas, do you?
Well, it didn't come up very much because it didn't come up for me very
Yeah.
much
Okay. Fair enough.
when I
That
lived
makes
there
sense.
and I was
That makes
that
sense.
age. Dallas was, you had to fight traffic. There was no reason to go there for me
Why would you? Yeah.
other
Yeah.
than to hit a bookstore or see a band.
Sure.
So on the band thing, and kind of, I just want to talk about the characters a little bit more. Like, there is so much stuff about the band. I love it so much. Were you in a band or anything, or is that? I mean, you said
I was in a
Sherwood's-
band. Well, I was in multiple bands for 10 years,
Mhm.
and I'm also a huge fan of This Is Spinal Tap. That
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
band humor makes me laugh really hard. And I had my own band stories that I wanted to tell.
Mhm.
And so that was
It
a
felt
way
so
to
real, yeah.
allow myself to do that, was to make Stephen a musician.
I
And
love it.
Also, just, and I don't want this to be offensive, but Tim is such a douchebag. I really dislike Tim. But he also feels super duper real. Like,
He's
Tim
very real.
is that guy. He's always there. Like, I mean, is Tim like Sherwood for you, based on a real person kind of thing, or just sort of embodies all the sort of
Most of my
archetypes?
characters are loosely based on real people,
Yeah.
but it's not accurate to say at all that any character is an actual person.
Sure. Yeah.
Right,
It's,
right.
it's
I just
ideas.
draw upon
Yeah, of course.
what I know to breathe life into the characters.
Yes.
And
yeah.
so Randy is a combination of several good friends of mine.
Mhm.
Tim is based on an actual musician I was in a band with. And he kind of epitomizes the kind of friends that we all have in life.
Yeah.
They're not our best friend,
Yeah.
and they're kind of douchebags, but your life is tied up with theirs somehow until you spend time with them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's okay that they're a douchebag because you're used to it. And,
Yeah.
frankly, you might yourself be a douchebag.
Absolutely.
I want to highlight two band scenes though, where the naming the band is so real. If to anyone that's ever named a band, it is the most ludicrous, nonsense, asinine thing that anyone's ever done, and you nail it exactly. And then the other one is when Tim brings a girlfriend to practice, and he just keeps walking over to the girl to talk to her, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, stop!"
No.
Like, and it's like, again, it's like that's exactly band practice when someone brings their girlfriend. It's always like that.
It is. Yeah. My other
I knew that musicians would react to that.
Oh my God, it's so good.
My other favorite band scene is when they're playing a cover song and they're both trying to play in different time signatures, and they successfully do it. And Dave too, which also brilliant to have another Dave come in. Like, we're not gonna try hard on this. Dave too is gonna be his name.
His name is Dave too.
And they're both successfully do it, and like Bonnie's rolling her like eyes and
love it.
stuff. It's so funny. The
my
recording
God.
studio,
It's all great.
It's ridiculous and awesome. Yeah.
Also, the fader thing. I went to school for music production. I don't do any recording nowadays, but literally all my engineer professors, this one was a guitar, but they said they almost always had a dead fader with a thing that said vocals for the lead singer, and they would just fake turn it up every time they walked by. And I was like, it's so real. That's actually what it's like. And what's funny is some of those details, if you're not in music, probably I could almost see them feeling gratuitous. If not, and not to say that, but like people are like, oh, that's too absurd. It's not like that. And it's like, no, we are here to tell you it is exactly like that.
Yeah.
That is exactly what it's like.
Yes.
So
Well, gratuity was a concern of mine because when you tell a period piece, you want to indicate the period by showing certain things. So, for example, if Stephen chose a snack food, that was an opportunity for me to say what the snack was, and then I could do research. What did people snack on in 1977? What brands were available? But you can't do that every time because then it feels gratuitous. So sometimes a snack is just a snack, and why would Stephen write the brand of the snack? He may just say, I had a snack and then I went to bed.
Yeah. I love that.
So I had to make sure that I didn't go too far with that. And so all the cars, there was a temptation to make them all iconic 70s cars, but I had to stop myself and remind myself that people just drove normal cars, just like they
Right.
not everybody drives
23-year-olds.
Yeah.
cars that epitomize the year 2024.
Yeah.
That's not how real life is.
Yeah, I drive a 2008, so I mean, I'm right there with you.
We're not all in Cybertrucks.
No,
Thank God.
I do agonize over the cars though, because everything I write about interests me, and if I'm not interested in it, I can't write about it convincingly.
Sure.
Yeah.
And perhaps other people aren't interested in it either. But back to like the faders and the musical details, I understand not everyone who reads Shagduk is going to be a musician and understand what any of that stuff is, but it lends something to the book that makes it realistic, whether you know what those things are or not, because that's what a real diary would read like.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Right.
I've never looked at somebody else's diary, but literary ones, of course.
Sure.
But I imagine that there's going to be a lot of stuff in there you don't know what the hell's going on. Like I remember reading Kafka's diaries, and it couldn't keep track of the people. He knew who they were, but I didn't. And so that was a challenge in Shagduk, was to write the characters in such a way that, like, Stephen's not going to describe what someone looks like, because he knows what they look like.
He knows,
wouldn't write that in your diary. So I had to find other ways to tell you what people look like.
Yeah.
And Randy's name is also the bastard too, so that's great.
That's one thing we've talked a lot recently on the show about kind of Tolkienian lore dumping, world building versus slightly more modern, kind of dropping you into the middle of the story and sprinkling enough world building throughout as you're going that you're not finding yourself lost. You're understanding what you need to understand as you're going. And I can see that being a unique challenge, but also an interesting opportunity when you're writing something as a diary. And something I thought that you pulled off very well was that feeling of, I'm not starting to read at the beginning of this person's story.
Yeah.
I'm dropped into the middle of it and then sticking with it, and it's interesting and entertaining enough that I keep going and I'm piecing together who is who and what's going on in this life and this world as he's finding something interesting enough to write it down himself.
It's pretty fun you talk about that too. Shagduk has the best of both worlds, where you get lore dumps from Randy, which are really fun, of this like, this lost continent idea,
Hysterian,
which I want to talk more about that too. But then you also get this piecing together of Stephen's world in literal Fort Worth, but also there's most of some of the stuff about the lost continent and the history there are lore dumped. The other things, but also naturally in a conversation where it totally makes sense. A lot of the magic in Stephen's life is piecemealed together, where you realize, he can do some things I didn't realize he could do. He's using magic, and I didn't realize he could do that. Which honestly, that's best of both worlds for me, because I love it when the sage or the buddy or the someone it's just fun when you get that conversation where they just give you the lore.
Yeah.
How intentional? I mean, we've talked about this a little bit already, but and it being a diary format is kind of set up for you, but I guess how intentional was that? And then also how challenging was it to kind of keep track of, I need to introduce this thing a little earlier, or, keeping track of what the reader needs to understand as you're going?
Well, I constantly look for opportunities to enrich the story. And so the lore dumping, that happens occasionally, and it needs to happen. It piques your interest. It gives you a hint of where things might go. I'm exploring Stephen's world as a writer. I'm exploring it with you, the reader.
Yeah.
when, I know where this is all headed, but I don't know everything about this place. I have my notebook, and I'm excited to find out what these places are really like.
I love that.
Yeah, the thing that kind of, I don't know if this is lore dumping, but it was definitely like a, whoa, that's on the page all of a sudden, is whenever a remote viewing is mentioned, I was like, oh shit, this is where we're going. And it's like Steven is like just able to do it. You kind of know that he kind of maybe figured out how to do it before, but that's how they end up coming to like what I felt like was the climax of the story. The last 30 pages, I couldn't stop reading. I was like, oh shit, oh shit. It's like it felt like Stranger Things in a really cool way.
Yeah.
Just like going to like a specific tunnel that he knew because he saw it, using magic and I guess words of power and stuff. Like that was really cool. And it was one of those things that, and we've talked about before in our book club, us, that I love it when a book kind of like you don't know what's happening and then all of a sudden it's happening right there. It's like it predicts what's going to happen next on the pages, and that was such a great moment. I feel.
Well, having Stephen demonstrate his powers, and it comes as a surprise to you, is it definitely keeps things exciting, but it's also a way to communicate to you that he's been doing his homework.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if I write too much about doing homework, that's boring.
Yeah.
Right.
So rather than tell you that, I show it to you when it needs to be shown.
Yeah. That makes me feel like I'm reading Gene Wolfe when I'm reading. I'm like, oh shit, he's a wizard. Like he can do this.
So, about the, I want to talk about some of the occult stuff and the alternative history stuff a little more, in both your history with it beyond the book, but also not. I thought it was really interesting. You've got Volcar, which is this lost continent. I think the most common perception of a lost continent, though, is the Atlantis or Lemuria sunken continent thing. But Volcar is like an ascended continent, which I think there are some real world alternate history ideas that like there was a continent of Mu that something like that happened. But I also thought there was an interesting parallel with Tolkien, and because obviously Numenor sinks, but Valinor like is raised up and separated. It's so you get both in Tolkien as well. I was curious if were those influences on what you were thinking, or what were your influences in what you were thinking, or was this just an idea you kind of ruminated on and it just happens to be there are outside parallels?
Well, it's a combination of things. I'm a skeptic by nature, and I don't really believe in much of anything. I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the occult or magic. Yeah. Yet these things are interesting, and it's fun to pretend that they could exist. Right. And that's what we're doing when we read books about wizards, is you're allowing yourself to believe
it's fiction.
What you're reading. So it disappoints me that our world is as mundane as it is, that you go back in time and instead of magical kingdoms, it's cavemen.
Yeah.
And if you go back even further, there aren't even any people at all. There's dinosaurs. I mean, dinosaurs are cool, don't get me wrong, but they don't stir my imagination the way, some mythical beast does.
Yeah.
So I know a little bit about how continental drift works, and I know that the Earth has gone through phases of rising and lowering sea levels in different climates and so forth. So I like to pretend that there could have been exceptional civilizations that were simply obliterated by tectonic processes. And because what evidence would be left behind?
Sure.
What we know about cavemen, for example, is based on very little. It's just, pottery shards and arrowheads and bones. And we've had to, through the scientific method, create the story of who these people were and how they lived. So I was kind of riffing on that. The sunken continent of Volkard doesn't have to correspond to any continent that we've heard of, like Mu.
Sure.
But I was kind of taking the lead from Tolkien, who, to create his own mythology of England, he simply mirrored that of neighboring mythologies, in particular
Sure.
Germany and
Yeah.
Northern Europe. And so there's harmony there. When you read the story of the Valar and the elves and stuff, you can see that in other cultures. So I'm always conscious of that kind of those echoes that help something ring more true.
Yeah.
Even though it's not true at all. There's no Volkar. There's no
Sure.
Mu.
It might be.
Maybe.
It might be
Maybe there was. According to James Churchward.
Oh.
I've got a pile of books here in case they come up in conversation.
Well, we maybe need to refer to this pile of books. That book looks awesome. I don't think I've familiar with that.
That's my first time hearing of Mu.
Yeah.
Well, we're big fans of all of those kind
Yes,
of
I love
lost
it.
civilization theories. I love Graham Hancock's work on all of that. I find it very compelling, and I've always had a hard time
It really is.
with the concept of physically anatomically modern humans existing for 300,000 years and it taking 290,000 years for us to figure out that we could stay in one place and plant some crops.
Yeah.
Like, for whatever reason, that idea of our conception of civilization only being around 10,000 years old is just not made sense to me.
Yeah.
So I love all those old theories, and that was one of the things that excited me the most as I was reading Shagduk, was seeing it in this world also.
Yeah, it's fun.
So, would you class yourself as a fringy, a fox, or a hedgehog?
I really don't know.
You're like
Probably
another
a
category?
fox,
Yeah.
because I've positioned the hedgehogs as unpleasant people in the book. The first time I heard of it was in a Woody Allen movie where
really? Okay.
what's her face? Judy Davis is seeing her shrink, and she goes off in this thing how, well, so and so's a fox, and this person, they're a hedgehog.
Yeah.
And she's just riffing off of some other guy who invented the concept, and I don't really know what it means.
Yeah.
But what's important
awesome.
is that Stephen knows what it
Exactly.
means. It means
Right.
something to him. And the way he adopted the fox and the hedgehog, whatever you want to call that, is something that we all do.
Yeah, no, for
Right.
sure.
Yeah, we were going
So that's
back
the
and forth
important
about
thing.
what each of us might be. It's just a fun category.
And you're not you're definitely
No,
not a
I
hedgehog, 'cause
thought
you're
that
not
as I
really-
was just beginning the
Yeah.
book, and then as I went on and he was talking about it more, I was like, nah. I probably would slot into the fox, I guess.
Yeah.
Probably.
No. I just want to be a fringy because what is that?
I definitely am a fringy, but yeah, I feel like
Well,
but yeah.
the word suggests something on the fringe, but my ex-wife's mother used to call different people fringies.
Yeah.
So someone with pink hair, there's a fringy.
Nice.
Well, then
in-
maybe not. Maybe I don't know.
In Stephen's case, there's a little bit more a down-to-earth element to it, because
Sure.
people literally wore fringe
Right.
in the
Yes,
70s.
that's what I was.
But only fringies would do that.
Right.
Well, he did wear that like belly shirt, right? That he got from those girls.
Yeah.
He
his
did
little
do
kind
that
of thing.
Wear a belly shirt.
He was trying to be like a rock god or something.
Yeah. That was amazing.
Also, just all of his blue balls moments are just so. Why doesn't he ever get with V? JB, he needed to get with V so bad. Like that hurts me a little bit.
Well, okay, she's loosely based on a neighbor I had. You could ask me, why did I not get with that neighbor? We don't know the answer
True.
to these stories.
Sure.
True.
We really don't.
The pain.
If
is
you
so
ask
real,
these
though.
questions of yourself,
Yeah.
you won't have the answers.
That's actually very real, because there are those moments that you think about in life where you're like, there was an opportunity there, I didn't take it, whatever it was.
We all have a V and a bathrobe who was not wearing panties. That was one of the funniest slides. Nope, not wearing panties.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Such a
Well, a 25-year-old male is going to be looking for that.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
I want to circle back to the occult a little bit more. Because we touched on the lost continent kind of thing, but what was did you have any sort of, I know you said you're a skeptic. Did you have any sort of background knowledge going into this about the occult? Whether it's Crowley or I think you mentioned Golden Dawn at one point as well.
And Rosicrucians, I believe. Yeah.
Was that an interest before going into this, or did it kind of spring up because of this?
Well, yes and no. The funny thing about me is when I read about any topic, when I read like, a textbook on geology, I'm reading it for entertainment, if that makes sense.
Sure.
If it's interesting, I'm being entertained. And if I'm entertained a lot, I'll retain some of what I read and maybe come out with some understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I approach the occult. Is I know it's all bullshit, but what if it wasn't?
Right.
I read about it as if it were real.
Right.
Because it's more fun to approach it that way.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I do think sometimes if you believe X, then you must believe Y, because they're the same sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when Stephen came to grips with the presence of Harvey, Shagduk, it made him rethink his non-belief in a God or Jesus. It's like, well, if I allow that this is real, suddenly all this other stuff comes into question. And he never quite seems to come to terms with it all, because really these kinds of things are unknowable.
Sure.
And we grapple with them always. And never really resolve any of them unless you have like my stepmother has a great deal of faith, and she's arrived at sort of a spiritual plateau where her beliefs in Jesus are to her as real as a stone, or a stick.
Yeah.
Right. Sure.
To us, if we're holding them in our hand.
Wow. Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. I love the Ouija board scene, because that kind of brought it back to, I guess, sort of like pop culture in that way with Tim and all them, but how Krolok introduces himself there, and like all of that, like it's almost like I forgot Krolok was there, but he's like still around. Is he the big bad kind of thing?
Well, I'm guessing that's the name that's etched out, is my guess. But we don't really know.
Yes, it's just the occult stuff is peppered in there.
I'm fascinated with the prospect of other worlds, including the one among us behind the veil. That you see in Irish mythology. The idea of portals and things of that nature. So I wanted to explore that. So there are ways to get in touch with those, to catch glimpses of those worlds, and sometimes you catch a glimpse of them accidentally. In mythology, you'll find stories about if you go behind a waterfall, that's how you get to the fairy world. So I like how they addressed it in the movie Poltergeist, where the sister was communicating through the static of the television screen. I used to have a shortwave radio when I was a kid, and it had this all these different bands, like shortwave bands and marine bands, and you had this fine tuning knob where if you turned it, the dial would just imperceptibly move, and I would turn the dial very slowly and a signal would get stronger, and then it would fade away, and you'd hear snippets of other languages.
Yeah.
That kind of sparked my imagination and stayed with me.
Well, isn't that that's a ghost hunter thing too, isn't it? What is it, like the EMF reader or something, or the tool that cycles through open channels, shortwave channels, as a means of trying to communicate with the other side?
So if you imagine then a powerful being who exists somewhere, and that being wants to communicate with Stephen, for example, how might he do that from a distance? And certain ideas just immediately lend themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole thing with and this is where the book was really serious, albeit it was super funny throughout it. But the main story that kind of gripped me through the whole thing is like, who is Professor Sherwood? And like, he's gone, and like nobody's really concerned. And then all of a sudden he has a funeral, which Stephen does his awkward speech, which is amazing. But yeah, that to me felt like the through story that like really gripped me. Like, oh shit, something's going on with this Sherwood guy. Like, that felt to me like the real story underlying all of the other fun, awesome stuff is who's Sherwood? He's gone. He left this magical power book that Steven's just like reading for fun and kind of beginning like good at, I don't know, doing magic stuff. But yeah, I just can't wait to read the next one. I just want to know, is Sherwood going to come back from, was his body even in the casket? Like,
I like to think of him as old Indiana Jones kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was an idea, but it felt like that
he kind of comes across that way.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that when I wrote him, but yeah, for sure. One of the things that informed Sherwood's character was when I went to school at the University of Texas at Austin. The undergraduate library on the second floor had a recreation of Earl Stanley Gardner's office.
Oh, wow.
And there were windows on all the walls admitting a view of his desk and his file cabinets, but all the crap that he collected in his travels. So there'd be like snowshoes and, a lion taxidermy, totem poles, and things of that nature, dream catchers, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'd stand there and just look at all this stuff and think, someday I'm going to have an office just like this.
Yeah.
I love
has
that.
not come to pass.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Someday.
Yes.
But when I thought up Sherwood, I thought, that his office is going to look like that.
That's what is.
Yeah. No, it totally does. In my mind's eye.
Okay. Did you have something you were gonna go with?
I'm just curious. I one final question, I guess, with the occult stuff is we talked a little bit about your history with it, but what kind of research did you do? Again, kind of a shop talk conversation, but what kind of research did you do specifically for Shagduk? And were you kind of making up your own rules a little bit, or were you basing it off of quote unquote real magical practices?
Well, I am by trade a librarian, and so I know how to do research. And so you could say that all of the reading I've ever done was research.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it had informed the notes that I kept, so I could look back on research I've already done to inform my writing. But if I ran up against something I didn't know about, I would stop and research it. To me, it's a lot of fun, and it's when I think of writing as a hobby, the main benefit of it, besides the creative outlet, is the excuse to learn stuff.
Yeah.
So, reading a year's worth of newspapers, for example,
That's awesome.
gave me all this insight to what it was like in 1977. Writing about the occult meant that I had to read about it. So I know something about these things now because it's, part of my hobby as a writer.
Sure.
So, to talk a little bit about maybe research, meaning just things you've read. Being a science fiction fantasy podcast, we were also curious to just talk to you about your history and relationship with just science fiction and fantasy literature in general. I think I've seen it elsewhere. You've talked a little bit about enjoying Jack Vance, but I was curious, especially like, what was your first memory of science fiction and fantasy? If you have a touchstone there.
Well, at first it would be film, in particular the Sinbad movies, Ray Harryhausen.
Yep.
That introduced me to the world of fantasy. When I was a little bit older and could read a paperback, I would go to the grocery store and they'd have these paperback spinners with, a lot of them had yellow spines that dog paperbacks had. Yeah. And you'd see books like Lynn Carter's The Year's Best Fantasy Stories.
Oh, nice.
And there's a lot packed into these first few volumes, like 1 through 6. That would keep you really busy. These Gore paperbacks,
nice.
The Conan reissues of the time. So I read whatever caught my eye, really, and it was the artwork of Vallejo and why can't I think of the guy's name? The most famous fantasy artist of all time.
Frazetta, maybe?
Frazetta, thank you.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of people who were doing the covers, and I love it. You didn't have to twist my arm. I just blew my allowance every single week on this stuff.
Yeah.
Later, when my tastes became more sophisticated, as I was exposed to other writers, I would discover Jack Vance, and I brought some titles here. Fritz Leiber's Grey Mouser series, but this book in particular, Conjure Wife, is a story that takes place on a university campus. Now, was it this one? I hope this is the right book. One of these books by him. I can't think of the other one. I think it's this one. A professor discovers his wife is practicing witchcraft. He opens a drawer in their bedroom and finds witchy things. And unbeknownst to him, witches control the whole university.
Okay.
And when he insists that she stop at once, cease.
Yeah.
Your involvement in this, it all starts to unravel.
Okay.
Because she can't do what she had been doing up until that point, which is preserving. Awesome. Yeah, it's pretty cool. But they made a no, that's Fritz Leiber, Conjure Wife.
Oh,
that's awesome.
That's Fritz. Okay. Yeah, we actually did a deep dive on all the Grey Mouser.
We were reading. Stuff. We read several.
This is the book.
Yeah, awesome.
Amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, we're big fans of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. Those were such fun books. So definitely excited to read some more of Leiber's work.
So then I discovered Tolkien that introduced a more scholarly element, because clearly the man was a scholar, and there a lot of research informed his writing. As someone who's interested in languages, I understood immediately that he had put a lot of time and effort into getting those languages right. But not only that, the place names, the names of the characters and how they had meaning rings true with respect to the origin of names in real life. My name Jeffrey, my parents didn't think about what it meant, but ultimately it means something like, friend of God or something. Mm-hmm. And back in the day, you didn't names weren't given purely because of the way they sounded. They were chosen on purpose.
Yeah.
But I digress. Let's see. I later discovered Dungeons and Dragons and Appendix N, And that really appealed to the research in me. You present a kid with a bibliography, an annotated bibliography. I was on fire.
Yeah.
So Margaret St. Clair wrote 3 really compelling books that are just dripping with atmosphere. Jack Vance's The Dying Earth, The Broken Sword by Paul
we love The
Anderson.
Broken Sword.
Big fans.
The way he handles the veil between reality and fairy is, I think, masterful.
Yep.
No kidding.
And it's the most convincing treatment of fairy that I've ever come across.
Yeah, we're obsessed with that book for sure.
And then, a musician will tell you this: to be a good musician, you absorb the influences of all kinds of music of every genre. And so as I began to study literature in general, I read a lot of the French and English novelists of the last few centuries.
Yeah.
And then through Tolkien, that's how I discovered mythological works like the Kalevala and Gilgamesh and so forth. Beowulf.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's awesome.
Let's see. For a while, I was really in love with Joris Karl Huysman, who wrote La Ba and Against the Grain. Those are very peculiar books that were very important to Oscar Wilde, of all people.
Oh, interesting.
This book really captured my imagination, The Purple Cloud by M.P. Scheel, because it's the Last Man on Earth theme.
Interesting.
So certain ideas intrigue me. Let's say you wake up one day and everybody's gone. You're the last person on Earth. What do you do next?
Yeah.
How do you feed yourself? Where do you get clothing? How do you stay warm? What do you do for entertainment? And these questions lead you down a path, and I'm interested in exploring that on the page. And so maybe one of these days I might be compelled to write
That's one thing.
Last Man on Earth.
That's one thing I loved the most about I Am Legend, specifically the book, Matheson's book. I know there's a lot of other beings left, but I loved reading his day-to-day life, even outside of trying to find a cure and educating himself and trying to figure things out as just a normal guy being the last man standing. But I love that kind of subgenre of post-apocalypse fiction.
It's like Robinson Crusoe, but cool.
Yeah, yeah, just being alone and by yourself, and how do you survive physically and mentally?
I love it.
That is fun.
Yeah, another post-apocalyptic book that comes to mind is Sterling Lanier's Hero's Journey.
Interesting.
I've not heard of that
I've
one.
not heard of that.
That's kind of a big inspiration on the game Gamma World.
Okay.
The setting for Gamma World.
Interesting.
I
will be
time
going through this
travel
and clipping
excites
all of
me.
these names.
Yeah, we need to.
I understand that we currently believe time travel is impossible,
Right.
but I like to pretend it is. And
Sure.
some of the most famous treatments of that I found pretty compelling as a kid, and in particular the Time Machine movie.
Yeah.
And then later the book by H.G. Wells.
And then Back to the Future. Just kidding.
Oh yeah. Back to the Future, of course.
Great.
Yeah. It had some holes in it, but it's a lot of fun.
I guess the later films are a little.
What time travel doesn't have holes in it though?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's hard not to.
And then Lovecraft, of course, I discovered him at some point, and that led to Lord Dunsany,
Yes.
who I would say Dunsany is an inspiration to me, but I can't say how.
Sure.
I guess there's just a vibe that I try to replicate sometimes when I want to make up an evocative place name or when I'm dealing with some of these other worlds in Shagduk, I'll often get my inspiration from Dunsany.
I've only read The King of Elfland's Daughter, but it was phenomenal. I need to read more of his works.
Well, I understand that that's an important book, and someone that I trust told me it was a great book, and I started it and didn't get very far. It didn't amaze me the way that some of the other stuff I'd read by Dunsany is. But the thing is, I recognize that I'm not always ready to read certain things.
Sure.
I'm not always ready to appreciate an album. So if you come back to it later, you have take a fresh look at it.
Absolutely.
There have been many times that I've been converted, and I look forward to the day when I can read that book again and appreciate it for what it is.
Well, as someone that enjoyed it, it's actually nice to know that his other works were, at least in your eyes, were more compelling. So it's always nice to know there's a wealth of material to dive into. It's kind of sad when you read an author and you've read everything that they've kind of written.
I know.
You kind of get, you're like, oh, it's like there's a sadness that sets in. Obviously, you can return to it. It's the worst thing about Tolkien is the man just did not write that much, but it's because of how much he put into it, I think, for the most part. But
the thing about Tolkien is The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings were an obvious success. But then when I eagerly, hunted down Silmarillion and then the later stuff that came out, the lore dumps, I just stopped reading. I said, okay, that's enough. I don't, this is way too much lore.
Yeah.
I appreciate that it's there and understand how it all works, but I don't need to read all of it. That's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
This is always a tough question, but do you have, JB, what's your desert island book or two? Like if you could only read one thing, what's the thing that you keep returning back to?
I do read things more than once, but these days I only read books that inform my writing. Books that can help me become a better writer. Yeah. And so that's what I'm looking for. What am I going to read next? That's what I have in mind, is how is this going to help me with the next book. Yeah. So with that in mind, I'm looking forward to rereading lots of things, but not because they're super important to me, but just because I know that they entertained me a lot once, and I'm looking forward to rediscovering them. Because it's been a long time since I've read the Elric novels, for example.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to rediscovering those. But yes, if you're looking for what's my most important book ever, I might say something by Jack Vance, possibly The Dying Earth.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's because there's something about the way Vance writes that my mind can take that football and run with it, and I don't need him anymore.
Interesting.
He gets those juices flowing in a way that no one else does.
Yeah. That's cool.
That's awesome. Well, I know that with the book on its way, there's probably not a whole lot that we can talk about, but maybe an interesting thing to kind of transition to Ursula of Ulm is, as much as you can, like what in the vein of reading books that are informing your writing currently. What are some things that you were reading for Ursula of Ulm?
Well, I've been reading a lot of Ian Fleming lately.
Oh, interesting.
And it's not necessarily that the character of Bond or those spy stories, they aren't the influence there is the man's writing, the
Yeah.
way he tells these stories, the way he handles a fight scene, for example. I find myself, I keep a pad of paper with me in the car and next to me on my chair, and jot down anything that catches my ear. I say ear, what I'm hearing as I read.
Right.
I'll write down a word or a sentence, and then later I'll take my notes at the end of the day or end of the week, and I'll transcribe them and file them. I don't have a big packed notebook anymore. Now I have, so I'm right in the middle of book 3.
Okay,
the book that follows Ursula of Ulm. And so I have a document for that book that is divided into subjects. So I'll have names, places, conversation pieces. I've got a category called, what is it called? Flair. So if I need some flair, I'll look at my document and see if I've got anything on there I can use at that moment. And it makes the process of writing easier when you've got that stuff right there. So if a girl walks into the room and I want to describe her, I've got a section for girls, and they're just passages and words, things that I picked up from Fleming and Jack Vance, that I'll look at my notes and I'll read it, and it'll get my juices going, and I'll come up with a solution.
I love that.
Sometimes I allow myself to just steal stuff if it's something that we all artists simply regurgitate their influences.
Absolutely.
And it's very clear. It's not something some of them even try to hide, like Led Zeppelin, for example. They built their entire career on the backs of Black American bluesmen.
Yes. Yeah.
But they made it their own,
right,
is the thing. And so if you can steal something and make it your own, I think of it as paying homage.
I was going to say, I like seeing
those,
the fingerprints of the works that came before. Like, we just finished reading for our book club. We just finished reading John Gwynn's The Faithful and the Fallen, and you can see it on the page. But he's also very upfront about his influences. Like David Gemmell and Lloyd Alexander and Bernard Cornwell, and I like being able to read a thing, especially as we're expanding our reach and what we've read in the science fiction and fantasy genre. I like being able to look and see
the
lineage of different works.
Yeah.
And does it bother you, for example, that the song Not Let It Be, Hey Jude by the Beatles, does it bother you that Paul McCartney simply ripped off Save This Last Dance for Me by the Drifters?
No,
if you knew that,
not even a little bit.
No, I don't even think I knew that one, but yeah.
And would it bother you that Stairway to Heaven seems to be a complete ripoff of a song by Spirit? Somebody in Spirit actually filed a lawsuit and said, you stole my riff. And they listened to it in court. They played the recordings together. And I think Led Zeppelin was found liable, I think. I don't remember anymore, but it really upset me that it even went to trial, because, when you listen to the two songs, first of all, there's only so much you can do on a guitar.
Yeah, there's only so many notes.
You're going to inadvertently reduplicate a riff that someone else thought up.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. But to me, they toured with Spirit, first of all. So there's red flag right there.
Yeah. Sure.
So they clearly heard the riff, and it found its way either intentionally or subconsciously into Stairway to Heaven. But I still don't. It doesn't negate, the importance of the song. It doesn't take away the enjoyment of millions of people over decades. So, bear these things in mind the next time you're tempted to steal a sentence from Tolkien.
Yeah. Just go for it. I love it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This has been a phenomenal conversation, JB.
I was just like, whoa, this is great.
We do have a question we like to ask everyone that
we have two that we want to close our interview out here with. But before we get to this, I do want to say because we loved Shagduk, we've enjoyed talking Shagduk. Yes. What would you like to when does Ursula of Ulm come out for the public?
Any day now.
Okay.
It could be the next week or two.
Okay.
Amazing.
I'd give it a month tops.
Amazing.
Okay. So is there any without giving too much away for either of the books, is there anything that you would like to talk about or say, or something that excites you about this next installment in the trilogy, or just something to kind of plug this next book?
Yeah, when I step back and I look at the completed work, I know where this is all going.
Yeah.
So Ursula of Ulm picks up the next day, where May 8th, I think, was the last entry. So this one starts with May 9th. It's the next morning. The mystery deepens. The stakes get higher. The danger increases. And it's going to take you much further along Stephen's road, and the ending is. Let me think for a second. I sometimes I get the books mixed up because they are just like Lord of the Rings, where the book was presented as a 400,000 chunk, and the publisher divided it into 3 books.
Okay.
And so I sometimes forget which book things happen in. But I'm trying not to give anything away.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the last thing that we would want.
I don't want it spoiled for me.
Yeah, for sure.
The one of the trouble when I did approach the publisher with what at the time was a completed work, but has since evolved into something bigger, they said that's too long. We're going to have to cut it down. So we found a place that felt like a good place to end it. So I had to go back and fashion something that felt like an ending, sort of.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But not really, because it, like, what is it? The first Lord of the Rings book doesn't really end.
Right.
We know the story continues. So I had to polish the ending off a little bit to eliminate the jagged edge that was left when we tore it. Mm-hmm. And then I had to come up with refashion the beginning of what became the second book. So Ursula has one of those endings where we just decided that this seems like a good place. So I feel good about it, and you'll want more if you're already invested in Stephen's story. Book 3 is essentially complete in that it has a beginning and an end and a middle. It's just that I'm working on the the details and polishing it, resolving problems that have come up in light of what books 1 and 2 revealed.
Right.
That one has a real cliffhanger of an ending. Book 4 is going to take it to the next level. It's
so there are 4. It's not just a trilogy.
I realize there were
well, there will probably be 5.
Awesome. Okay.
Awesome.
Given what happens in 4, it raises certain questions and presents certain opportunities that were very tempting to me. And so I've put some thought into book 5, and I want to end it there for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think there's going to be 5 books.
Amazing. This is news to me. This is awesome.
Yeah, very excited to be in this world for 4 more books. That's fantastic.
And it gives me an opportunity to write about all the things I wanted to write about. For example, I wanted to tell my music stories.
Yeah.
So I put Stephen in a band. So these 5 books will allow me to get that all out of my system.
I love it.
And sometimes I think about, well, what happens after that? that might be all I have in me.
Okay.
Sure.
I could take a stab at a time travel book of The Last Man on Earth.
I was about
type
to
of
say,
thing.
we've talked some other ideas.
Oh, another story it's really compelling to me is On the Lamb. Where did the Jeffrey Household book? This is one of the great On the Lamb books.
Okay.
Mail.
Mhm.
Heck
Mhm.
yeah.
It's not fantasy at all. It's more in the vein of Ian Fleming.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very
I
cool.
love it.
I'd like to tell an On the Lamb, but there's some of that in Ursula of Ulm already. So we'll see. Maybe I'll get it out of my system.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, we can't wait to read it, and
I do
and we'd love to have you back on after it's out and talk more about.
Yeah, I
about
love
book
this.
two.
This is so much fun.
Yeah, you've
Yeah,
been
good.
extremely
So
generous with
interesting.
your time, and
I was
we've
gonna
had a
say,
great time.
we need to do a conversation after Ursula's out, but also like we'll stay in communication. If you ever just have a fantasy take, you just like, I want to talk about this. Like this was great. We'd love to do that again. So.
Yes. Yeah.
And that leads us here into our kind of ending questions.
Right.
The serious one here. What would you like to see more of in science fiction and fantasy literature?
Well, my tastes tend to I like older stuff. Only because well, I won't get into that, but there's something about when I read an old book, it takes me far away from here and now more
Sure.
effectively than a book that's written today that is infused with our time and our
Sure.
place, our zeitgeist. So that's probably the most compelling reason I tend not to pay attention to a lot of new books. I did, because I'm published by Pylon Press. That's how I came across Sky Hernstrom's.
We have a copy here on the table too.
Yeah.
I saw it on one of your other podcasts, I think.
Awesome.
What I like about Sky's book is this book does for me the same thing that Len Carter's
Wow.
collections did. It takes me away from here and now effectively in a way that a lot of new writing does not. And what's great about this book is he's not simply mimicking an older style and creating a museum piece. This is living, living art. And an analogy I'll use is Woody Allen enjoys jazz music. So if you've ever seen clips of him play with his jazz band, it's like sitting in a museum and watching robots replicate old New Orleans jazz. It's a museum piece. It's not, it doesn't have any pull to it at all. That is not the case with Den's Vision. I'm excited, really excited to get a novel from this guy. He's working on one, I'm told.
I love that.
Very exciting.
I would read that.
Yeah, I've read about half of this so far, and just with other things, I've not finished it yet, but I've loved it. I've read about half of something else he'd published, this Eye of Sanu, and that's the same way. It's exactly what you said. He's tapping into something older, but while doing the sword and sorcery thing, he's also speaking to modern issues and things that those authors wouldn't have written about but it doesn't feel.
Yeah.
It is transportive, exactly like I've been really blown away. And also the stories are just fun too, which a lot of writing I feel like is just not that fun anymore. It's just very sloggy and very people just don't write adventure stories as often. I've totally enjoyed them. But
Yeah.
Well, writing is a craft, and some people are just gifted, but you can hone your craft, and there are lots of techniques and tools at our disposal. My advice to people who want to write something that's really good is read really good writing and don't pollute your mind with stuff that isn't that doesn't do something for you on some level. And I'm not saying there's a time and a place for crap, for shit. There's a lot, people are dismissive of so-called bubblegum music, but bubblegum music does something effectively in a way that no other music can.
Yeah.
Take the song Hot Blooded by Foreigner, for example. Rolling Stone would have had a field day with the lyrics. This is so stupid. But that song is the most effective song that conveys what it feels like to go into a club and you want to get laid. And you can only tell that story the way that Foreigner told it.
Absolutely.
But and those are not like you said, the lyrics are stupid, but those are not like high intelligence feelings. So it makes sense for them to be very raw and down to earth.
Like Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, you don't have to talk about that. But.
Yeah, we didn't. Yeah, I didn't need to bring that up.
So Sam, what's your final question here?
So our last question is, what do you get when you go to Taco Bell?
Well, growing up in Fort Worth, we had Taco Bueno, which is superior to Taco Bell.
Great.
And whenever I go back and visit, I always go to Taco Bueno. But the two places are, very similar. And my entire life, I've always gotten 3-bean burritos.
Nice.
Wow.
Phenomenal.
That's
what
I like.
Solid choice.
That's a classy order.
It is classy.
3-bean burritos and a Diet Coke.
There you go.
Okay.
Love it.
I prefer Diet Dr. Pepper, but they tend not to serve that.
Not to serve it
at restaurants.
I've been trying to find.
But the Holy Grail, though.
Oh, sorry.
The Holy Grail is a Pib Zero.
Whoa!
I discovered it accidentally on the internet, and I asked around, and Aunt got some for me. So last time I went back to Texas, she presented me with a 12-pack of Pib Zero.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Wow.
And I had driven there, and so I was able to bring it back to California, and it was like I felt like I was really getting away with something. It was fantastic.
I have very fond memories of Mr. Pibb because I want to say I think I played baseball in Nolensville, Tennessee, which at the time was just a little tiny town 5 minutes away from my house. And I want to say that they didn't have Dr. Pepper in the concession stands. They only had Mr. Pibb. I want to say that's why I remember drinking a lot of Mr. Pibb as a kid after ball games. And so there is a kind of a romance to the, second tier Dr. Pepper brand that is like imprinted in me. And it made me happy seeing it in the book.
Yeah. Pib Zero. All right. Sounds great.
Well, this has been absolutely phenomenal, JB. Thank you for your time. We've loved hanging out with you.
Yeah.
And look forward to the next one. Cannot wait for Ursula of Ulm. And to everybody out there, go read Shagduk. Get ready for book 2. It's going to be a blast.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for inviting me on here. I love what you're doing. This is
Thank you.
a really cool podcast. It makes me want to look at podcasts.
Yay!
Awesome.
That's
Mission accomplished.
That's an accomplishment already.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, JB.
Have a good one.